Welcome to our Dispatch Track Strategic Routing tutorial. In this tutorial, we will demonstrate routing strategies that will reduce the number of miles on multiple routes while eliminating the need for multiple long routes, allowing you to keep driving time to a minimum and within DOT regulations. If you are not familiar with the basic functions and operation of the app Dispatch Track, we will be demonstrating those in greater depth in our Dispatch Track Basics tutorial. For now, let's get right into some routing strategies so we can walk through a few pointers for those of us who are familiar with the terrain. We will move through the basics swiftly while we focus our efforts on the strategies necessary for success. The goal, first and foremost, is to fill each route with an amount of stops that will be productive for the client, profitable for the contractor, and able to be accomplished in an agreeable amount of time where the delivery team and the customers being served are all content and happy with the quality of service being provided. To reach our goals, we want to stick to some simple techniques that will allow us to create routes that are able to be successfully run, remembering that time and distance are our two main obstacles. The third obstacle will be intraday requests, and finding ways to honor them without adding a significant number of miles to accomplish the goal. The techniques we will demonstrate today will build a strong foundation that will allow you to accomplish your goals. There are several ways we can go about building routes, but to reach all of the aforementioned goals, we will focus on the bullseye method. The bullseye method is focused on keeping stops in the route in one target area of the routing field, no matter the distance traveled from the loadout location. Once the team reaches the target area, they can complete all of their stops in that area and return home. In the event that a team would have to break route or return to a stop, they won't be traveling backwards to do so. Within the route circle, they could cross the route circle to make intraday requests or emergency reroutes. A tight routing group with the least amount of travel time between stops will be beneficial to all. This is the method most likely to accomplish our goals and to avoid overlapping routes, wasted resources, and creating multiple long routes where unnecessary. As you can see here, grouping the perimeter stops into groups that will become the new route will keep the stops closer together regardless of how far away from the warehouse the first stop will start. Your job is to keep all the stops together in one group, so once the team travels the distance to reach the area, they will do all the stops in that area and no other truck will have to travel as far. The biggest driver complaint won't be how far away the area was where they were working. The biggest complaint will be how far they had to travel between stops throughout the day. Grouping stops this way will avoid those complaints. An alternate method would be the pinwheel, or sometimes called the starburst method. In certain circumstances, this type of strategy would be useful but not as a first option. In the case where you will be routing a far-out location that doesn't have enough stops to be profitable, you will want to utilize the pinwheel to add stops closer to the loadout location as not to go out of route to fill the truck. That should be the only circumstance you will want to use this method. There is a common assumption that this method reduces route mileage, but that is simply not the case. Route mileage will be determined by the furthest stop on the route, no matter how many stops are added closer to the warehouse. Therefore, stops on the route at the furthest point should be grouped with all the stops in that area on that same truck. Your goal is to eliminate the need to send multiple trucks to those same long-distance areas. Stops closer to the loadout location will always be better served when they are grouped into routes with locally routed teams. The more stops given to those teams, and the less distance those teams have to travel between stops, the more stops they can complete in a relatively short time span. This is another reason why we, as a rule of thumb, start the routing process with commingles first and then the farthest out locations second to work our way back towards the loadout location as we build the closest and heaviest routes. Assuming that all commingles have been routed, or you were fortunate enough that there weren't any commingles today, we'll go straight into routing the furthest stops first from the perimeter of our delivery market. If you are familiar with Dispatch Track, you know you have the option of selecting a route number to build and just adding each stop one by one. Or you can select Auto Route and circle the area you want to place on the route to have Dispatch begin the process for you. I prefer to use Auto Route because it reminds me of the objective of bullseye routing and keeping the routed area tight so that less travel time is accumulated getting from stop to stop by the delivery team. I would also like to point out that in Dispatch you will see the routing lines drawn from the loadout location to the first stop and from stop to stop during the route. Remember, these lines are not the actual route that the delivery team will travel between stops. These lines are just a directional guide tool to keep the router orientated to the start location as he or she follows the routing process. I like to refer to them as orientation lines. Those lines are drawn on the screen as the crow flies and are not to be taken literally. If you find yourself picking stops along those orientation lines to add to the route, you will actually be adding unnecessary travel time to the route. Only follow the routing lines if the routing lines happens to follow a major traffic route in the same direction. Once you have selected the appropriate amount of stops for the route, open the route settings to set the appropriate route settings, and then give dispatch an opportunity to find the shortest route possible with the new settings in place. If the route orientation lines are not zigzagging or crisscrossing in any strange patterns, undock the unit and show the route next to the map. Notice the amount of stops or show. Pay special attention to the route time listed in hours and minutes. Remember, DOT regulations prohibit drive time to 12 hours per shift for local freight drivers. Anything above 12 hours will show up red in the details. Small adjustments to the route distance or settings to the TSF or stop time settings per stop will help in most circumstances. However, sometimes the only fix is to remove a stop or two. Scroll down each stop and determine whether each time frame is in the right sequence and that there are no intraday requests that are out of their requested time frames. If there are no conflicts, it's safe to lock the route and hide it so that you can strategically clear the field as you go. Working from the furthest stops out back towards the loadout point or warehouse will allow you to make as few long routes as possible. This method will allow you to add more stops per route as you get closer to home because the team will spend less time driving and more time making stops. You will notice that as the mileage decreases, so will the route time. Here are some do's and don'ts along with some best practices to remember. 1. Always do co-mingles first and then work from the stops farthest away, working back towards the warehouse. 2. Keep the stops that you select for the route that you are building as close together as possible. 3. Pay attention to the mileage as well as the time on the routes that you build. 12 hours is the maximum according to DOT regulations. 4. Avoid putting stops in a straight line from far out back to the dock. Routes should be close or far, not both. 5. When all the faraway stops are on routes and the remaining stops are close to the dock, you are able to increase the number of stops on the routes gradually without adding a lot of time or miles. 6. The more stops that are on the closer routes, the less routes you will have to make. Use time and mileage as your gauge of how many stops you can place on a truck. 7. There should never be routes crossing over each other unless they are unavoidable co-mingles. 8. There should never be multiple trucks delivering in the same neighborhood. With these tips and guidelines, you should have a strong foundation and a successful strategy to build on. Remember that there are always exceptions to the rules, but exceptions should never become the rules. Although it may seem trivial, there should be a logistical why in what you are doing and the reason why. Sound routing is at the foundation of your logistical goals, even though this why should be the why for everyone involved in the third-party delivery process. It's very important to the rest of the supply chain that it starts with routing. There is a reason that the third-party delivery industry is often called last-mile delivery. In the entire chain from purchase to the satisfied customer, it begins and ends with the customer, and only a satisfied customer can seal the deal. In between the initial purchase and the satisfied customer, there are a lot of moving parts. Everyone in this industry that receives a check shares in the profits of each and every delivery purchase. As we all go about our day, the fact remains that if the customer is not satisfied with the successful delivery and install of the product, we all lose. The customer will go away, and with them will go the price they pay for our services. We all depend on customer satisfaction and for the proceeds of the purchase to be divided accordingly. This is why LTR scores, on-time delivery and completion rates are so important to the industry. The delivery team is the last leg of that process. It's our job as routers to give them the greatest opportunity to succeed. So, get out of bed knowing that supporting those delivery teams is the way you provide a living for yourself and feed your families. You're depending on everyone else in the chain to do their part, and everyone else in the chain is depending on you. Why do we do it? We do it for the greater good and the prosperity of us all.